Hey, welcome back to another episode of We All Scream. It's Lisa here, and today I'm bringing you a story that's as chilling as it is fascinating. We're diving into the twisted history and terrifying hauntings of Waverly Hill Sanatorium in Louisville, Kentucky. This place has it all: tragedy, mystery, and more ghost stories than you can count. So get comfortable, maybe grab a blanket and hide under it, and let's get into it. All right, so let's rewind the clock back to the late 1800s. Back then, Louisville was a completely different place, far from the bustling city it is today. It was rural, quiet, and honestly pretty isolated. And this is exactly what Major Thomas H. Hayes was looking for when he bought a huge piece of land just outside of town in 1883. He wanted to build a family home, something away from the noise and chaos. But here's the thing: there were no schools anywhere nearby for his kids. Now, most people in that situation might have looked into sending their kids off to a boarding school or something, but not Major Hayes. Nope, he decided to build his own school right there on his property. So he hires a teacher, Miss Lizzie Lee Harris, to educate his children. Miss Harris was apparently a huge fan of Sir Walter Scott's Waverly novels. Think of these as some of the most popular books of that time, kind of like today's bestsellers. She loved these books so much that she asked Hayes if she could name the school Waverly School. Hayes, probably thinking, why not, agreed. But he didn't stop there. He liked the name so much that he decided to rename his entire property Waverly Hill. Now let's fast forward to the early 1900s. Louisville, like a lot of cities at the time, was hit hard by tuberculosis, or the White Death as they called it. It's hard to imagine now, but back then tuberculosis was a nightmare. It spread quickly, was often fatal, and there was no real cure. It was especially bad in cities like Louisville, where the humid air and poor ventilation just made everything worse. By 1900, Louisville had one of the highest tuberculosis death rates in the United States. The city was desperate to do something about it, so in 1906, they established the Board of Tuberculosis Hospital. Their mission was to find a spot far enough from the city where they could build a sanatorium to isolate and treat tuberculosis patients. They needed a place that was remote, with clean air and lots of space. After searching for the perfect location, they landed on Hayes' property at Waverly Hill. The spot had everything they were looking for: high elevation, which they thought would mean better air; peace and quiet, which they believed would help patients recover; and it was far enough from the city to keep the disease from spreading. So they started construction in 1908, and by 1910, the first version of Waverly Hill Sanatorium was ready. It was pretty modest at first, a two-story wooden building with a couple of open-air pavilions where patients could get fresh air and sunlight. This was crucial because back then, fresh air and sunlight were considered the best treatment for tuberculosis. The sanatorium opened on July 26, 1910, and it quickly filled up with patients. But the thing is, tuberculosis was spreading faster than anyone could have imagined, and the sanatorium quickly became overcrowded. They realized that they needed more space and they needed it fast. So in 1924, they started building a new, much larger facility. This time, it was a 5-story brick and concrete structure designed by a well known local architect named D.X. Murphy. This new building was massive. It could hold up to 400 patients and was designed to be a self contained community. We're talking everything from laundry services to a maintenance garage, a butchery, and even farmland. The idea was that patients could live there for months, maybe even years, without ever needing to leave the grounds. Living at Waverly Hills wasn't exactly easy. Tuberculosis was a brutal disease, and the treatments they tried were pretty harsh. Medical science was still at its early stages, and doctors were trying all sorts of experimental treatments, some of which sound more like torture than medicine. They believed that exposing the lungs to as much fresh air as possible was crucial, so patients were placed on open porches or in sunrooms where they were bathed in sunlight and fresh air regardless of the season. Imagine lying outside in the dead of winter covered in blankets and snow because doctors thought it might help you get better. But as the disease progressed, the treatments became even more intense. One of the most notorious was the implantation of balloons in the lungs, which were then inflated in an attempt to expand the lung tissue. This procedure was incredibly painful and often led to severe complications, including death. If that didn't work, they tried something called thoracoplasty. I'm pretty sure I'm saying that wrong. A surgery where they removed several ribs to give the lungs more room to expand. This was considered a last-ditch effort, and it was so dangerous that many patients did not survive. Those who did were often left with severe physical deformities and chronic pain. And then there's the infamous body shoot. Now, this sounds like something out of a horror movie, but it was very real. Waverly Hills had a 500-foot long tunnel that ran from the main building to the railroad tracks at the bottom of the hill. Originally, it was used to bring supplies in and out of the hospital, but as the death toll rose, it took on a much darker purpose. The staff started using the tunnel to discreetly transport the bodies of deceased patients out of the hospital. They didn't want the other patients to see just how many people were dying, so they used this tunnel to keep things a bit more discreet. It's estimated that around 8,000 people died at Waverly Hills, though some stories claim the number was much higher at 63,000 deaths. By the late 1930s, things started to change for the better. Medical science was finally making progress, and in 1943, they discovered an antibiotic called streptomycin, which was a game changer for treating tuberculosis. Slowly but surely, the number of cases began to decline, and by 1961, Waverly Hills wasn't needed anymore, so they shut it down. But of course, that's not the end of the story. In 1962, the building reopened as the Woodhaven Geriatric Center, a nursing home for elderly patients with dementia, mobility issues, and severe mental disabilities. Unfortunately, the conditions at Woodhaven were far from ideal. The facility was poorly managed, and there were numerous reports of patient abuse and neglect. Things got so bad that in 1982, a grand jury investigation revealed the extent of the problems, and the state of Kentucky ordered the facility to be shut down. Once again, Waverly Hills was left abandoned. After Woodhaven closed, Waverly Hills just kind of sat there, slowly falling apart. Vandals broke in, and it became this creepy abandoned building that people dared each other to explore. In 1983, a developer bought the property with plans to turn it into a minimum security prison, but the locals were not on board with that idea, and the plan was scrapped. Then someone else tried to turn it into apartments, but they couldn't secure the necessary funding, so that plan fell through as well. Then, in 1996, Robert Alberhassi bought the place with a completely different vision. He wanted to build the world's tallest statue of Jesus on the roof, similar to the one in Rio de Janeiro, and turn the building into an arts and worship center. But despite all of his enthusiasm, the project never really got off the ground. He couldn't raise the money he needed, and by 1997, the plan was officially abandoned. Once again, Waverly Hills was left in limbo. During this time, Waverly Hills developed a reputation as one of the most haunted places in America. Ghost hunters, thrill seekers, and paranormal enthusiasts were drawn to the site, lured by stories of ghostly apparitions, unexplained sounds, and other supernatural phenomenon. The legends surrounding Waverly Hills continued to grow, and soon the site became a must-visit destination for anyone interested in the paranormal. In 2001, Waverly Hills finally found new owners who were genuinely committed to preserving its history. Charlie and Tina Mattingly bought the property and began the long process of restoring the building. They established the Waverly Hills Historical Society and started offering tours to raise funds for the restoration work. They also started hosting an annual haunted house event on the first floor, which has since become incredibly popular, drawing huge crowds every year. Now let's talk about the ghost stories, because this is where things get really interesting. Even after all these years and all the restoration work, Waverly Hills remains one of the most haunted spots in the country. There are so many stories, and each one as chilling as the next. First up is room 502. This room has a seriously creepy reputation. According to legend, in 1928, a nurse named Mary Hillenberg hanged herself in the room. She was 29 years old, unmarried, and pregnant, a situation that was pretty scandalous back then. It's said that her despair drove her to take her own life, but the story doesn't end there. In 1932, another nurse reportedly jumped to her death from the same room's window. Some people even believe she was pushed, though there's no solid evidence to support that. Room 502 has become a focal point for ghost hunters and paranormal investigators. Visitors often report feeling an overwhelming sense of dread when they enter the room, as if something dark and malevolent is still hanging around. People have heard disembodied voices warning them to get out, and have seen shadowy figures moving about the room. Some visitors have even claimed to feel an icy hand on their shoulder, only to turn around and find no one there. It's one of those places that just gives you the creeps, and the stories that surround it only add to the eerie atmosphere. And that's just the beginning. On the third floor of the children's wing, you might come across Timmy, one of the more playful spirits said to haunt Waverly Hills. Timmy was a young boy who, like many kids, loved to play catch. Even after all this time, it seems Timmy hasn't lost his love for the game. Visitors often bring a ball with them, and if you roll it down one of the long, dark hallways, don't be surprised if it comes rolling back to you. It's a little eerie, but also kind of sweet. Timmy's presence is a reminder of the innocence that was lost within these walls, and his playful nature brings a touch of light to the otherwise dark history of Waverly Hills. But there's more. People have also reported seeing a young girl in a blue dress with matted hair and no eyes. This ghostly figure has been spotted wandering the halls, often carrying a round object. Her image has even shown up in photos taken by visitors and paranormal investigators, further cementing her place in the haunted lore of Waverly Hills. Then there's the woman with bloody wrist, who's often seen near the sunrooms where patients were treated with ultraviolet light. Witnesses have described her running through the halls screaming for help, a tragic and terrifying figure who might be reliving the final, desperate moments of her life over and over again. Outside, people have reported seeing lights flickering in the windows, even though the building hasn't had power in years. Footsteps, disembodied voices, and doors slamming shut on their own are all part of the haunted experience at Waverly Hills. Some visitors even say they've been touched by unseen hands, and others have seen a phantom hearse pulling up to the back of the building as if it's there to pick up coffins. And let's not forget the kitchen. There's a ghostly figure of a man in a white coat who's been seen there, usually accompanied by the smell of freshly baked bread. The strange part, the kitchen is completely in ruins with no working equipment, so there's no way anyone could actually be baking anything. It's like the past is still playing out in that room, even though it's just a shell of what it used to be. So what is it about Waverly Hills that keeps us so captivated? Is it the sheer number of deaths that occurred there, the tragic stories of those who lived and died within its walls, or maybe something even more mysterious, some kind of energy that just won't rest? Whatever the reason, Waverly Hills Sanatorium has earned its place as one of the most haunted locations in America, where history and the supernatural come together in a way that continues to draw people in year after year. So as we wrap up today's episode, I'd love to hear what you think about Waverly Hills. Have you ever been there? If you got any ghost stories of your own, hit me up on social media or drop a comment on this video. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And hey, don't forget, your support helps keep this podcast going. So please subscribe on YouTube, follow us wherever you listen to your podcast, and stay tuned for more spooky stories. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and as always, trust no one.